Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Doctors of Running virtual roundtable, where we, a group of doctors of physical therapy, discuss the art and the science of the stuff that we are putting on our feet. Today, we have the normal gang. We got Dr. Matthew Klein in the house. We've got myself, and we're going to have a fun little episode in front of us about trail shoes and road shoes. What's the difference? Do they matter? Things like that. So we're going to start it off the same normal way we normally do. We're going to have the subjective portion here, and our subjective for this week is: when do you strap on your trail shoes? And if you don't, why don't you have a pair? So what do you say to that, Matt?
So, for the longest time, I never got a pair of trail shoes. And this is coming from somebody who worked in running retail for years. And I was kind of like, what's really the point? And I grew up in the Northwest, so I would just use road shoes for everything. When I came down to Southern California and got into a little bit more of the technical mountain trails that we have here, where even though they're not wet, well, they can be, I found that having the security from a trail shoe was definitely helpful at times. And now when we do get rain, it does pour, and our dirt tends to hold that water for a long, long time, and it tends to get really slick. So again, when it comes to security in all different forms, that's where I've learned I like grabbing a trail shoe, because sometimes the traction on a road shoe is just not enough, especially when it comes to making sure you've got good footing as well as safety. So that's kind of the big reasons I grab it. So if there's rain or technical terrain, I'm going to grab a trail shoe. Now, I wouldn't have done it in the past.
Yeah.
What about you?
I agree completely. I mean, we're both based out of Southern California, or I guess I'm Central Coast now, but Santa Barbara is interesting because we have a lot of bluff trails where you don't really need trail shoes for, but we do have a lot of front country trails that have a lot of vert with pretty technical terrain, depending on which route and which trail you take. And that extra little bit of security and traction definitely go a long way. And there's a couple that do follow creek beds and things like that, and I can relate to that fully. That doesn't get a lot of sun coverage, and so when it does rain and it gets wet, certain sections just get a little sloppier than you would like. And if you don't have a trail shoe on, you definitely slip out a little bit. So yeah, no, I feel the same way on that one. For the East Coast folk out there, I hear you guys have much different trails. A lot more roots and rocks and more, I guess you could say, wet terrain and climates and moisture holding things. But
I'd also put out there, snow is definitely a major reason to have a trail shoe, just because we'll talk about lugs and security and stuff like that. But, in Southern California, we don't get exposed to it as much. I've had the opportunity to get up into the mountains, and David lived even closer than I did, Big Bear, Wrightwood, and stuff like that, and been up there in the snow, and been very thankful that I had a trail shoe on, because road shoe I would have slipped everywhere, and you need traction. So a lot of people in the East Coast and Midwest can speak a lot more to that than maybe David and I can in Southern California, since it's 70 to 80 degrees all year long most of the time. So little different reason there, but another reason that you might want to consider this.
To be fair, yeah, I did run some of those trails in the snow. I grew up pretty close to that area. Yep. I was in a weird situation. Yeah, where I immediately lived, it very rarely snowed, but it snowed very close to where I grew up. And so you just go on a very short drive minutes, down the road.
20?
Not even, 15.
Yeah, not even?
And then it's like a blanket. Because we're right at the base of the mountain right before you go up toward Big Bear. Mm-hmm. And it was not hard to get to snow at all. With that said, though, at that time, I really didn't wear any trail shoes. I mean, this is back when I'm in high school, and I kind of just had one pair of daily trainers. Right. I had my racing flats and some spikes, and that was kind of all I had.
In high school, college, I was the same way, right? Because I grew up in the Northwest and went to college in the Northwest, so we get super muddy because it's raining there all the time. But I still wore road shoes for everything. Although retrospectively, having gone back with trail shoes, I'm like, oh, that would have been so much better. But lesson learned.
Yeah. And I guess that takes us to our next little segment here.
Yeah.
Yeah, go for it.
That's our subjective question, by the way. So put a comment down below as to why do you have trail shoes or why you don't have trail shoes. It'd be really interesting to hear from all of you what your opinions or thoughts are.
Yeah, and when do you decide to put them on? If you do have
Yeah.
them, and if you have a rotation. Yeah. And so I guess that leads us to the next portion here. So it's, what are the main differences between road versus trail? And what does it take for a shoe to even be considered a trail shoe in the first place?
That's a great question. What makes a road versus a trail shoe other than marketing, right? Because typically a company will market shoe going, this is a trail shoe, right? This is a road shoe. But I think we need to dive into this a little bit more about, well, obviously we're doing an episode on it. Of course, we're going to dive into it more, but we need to talk about what in our minds might define this. So David, what do you think?
Yeah, I think some of it, there's some basic components that get laid into trail shoes. I think having a more secure upper is one of those that have to come with it, whether it's more abrasion resistant. I've got like a graveyard of shoes right next to me here, and I didn't grab that one. Why didn't I grab that one? For the listeners, this is the New Balance More Trail version 2 that Klein is holding up there. Wonderful shoe. I like that shoe a lot. I do not know why I grabbed it, and that's going to bug me for the rest of the episode. But if you take a look, like just grabbing a couple things here off the side, you have the Saucony Peregrine 12 here, the Hoka Speedgoat 5. These uppers, they're a little bit less stretchy. They lock in a little tighter to the foot. So a lot of them will have overlays and things like that that go around the medial and lateral aspect, just in case you brush up against rocks on tight turns. A lot of them will have toe guards up front, just in case you poke a rock, because that does happen quite frequently, especially here when you have steep grades and you're going up or down, and there's a lot of just rocks sticking out that you could easily clip. And then outsole coverage, you're going to have lugs. You don't really have lugs on road shoes. So depending on the depth of the lugs and the spacing of the lugs, it could be for like technical terrain or more runnable terrain or things like that, but you will have lugs. And I think, let's see, we talked about the upper, the outsole there. They tend to be a little bit firmer as well. They're usually EVA midsoles. There hasn't been too many like new generation foams that have made their way out to the trail market just yet. They're kind of starting to get there, but I think those are probably the big things. Rock plates to protect from rocks underfoot. So a lot of trail shoes, they'll put a plate underneath to just help with some of the compression down on a hard surface under your foot. That, or they'll have enough foam to where it doesn't really matter in the first place. So if you look at something like the Brooks Caldera or the Hoka Speedgoat, something like this, where you've got a lot of cushion underfoot, you don't really need that plate. So those are definitely some of the components.
So the big things I'm hearing is a lot more protection, a lot more durability. They also tend to run heavier because of some of these factors, just because not always, but a lot of the uppers have more overlays just for protection. There's often more, there's not always, but because that's changing, but often there could be a little bit more stack height, or there's more apparatuses in the midsole. So rock plates are really common. The other thing is the outsole is going to be really different. So road shoes, you'll typically have a pretty smooth outsole. There's a couple exceptions out there, but on trail shoes, you're going to have lots of solid traction because that's really, really important for being able to build, to have security on a variety of surfaces. So you'll have these thick lugs, and how big those lugs are going to be completely dependent on what the purpose of the shoe is. So you might have something like what David's holding up right now, where it's got these really thick, aggressive lugs in certain areas, and that's really meant to grip on a variety of terrain, whether it be soft dirt, whether it be on a little bit of mud, whether it's steep terrain, just to give you a bit of better lockdown. Then you might have something a little bit less. David, for the listeners, which shoe are you holding up right now?
I'm holding up the Hoka Torrent.
Yeah, so the Hoka Torrent
too. Lighter
weight shoe, little smaller lugs. It's meant to go faster, so it's a little less aggressive in terms of its protection because it's meant to go faster. But those lugs are a really apparent thing with a lot of trail shoes because traction, again, is a major component and a major difference between road and trail, not just road and trail shoes.
Yeah, I agree completely. And then just talking about lugs, you'll see the word all-terrain thrown out every once in a while. Or you'll see a daily trainer such as the Pegasus, and they'll say Pegasus Trail. They'll add a Gore-Tex upper. That's another thing to talk about, water resistance and things like that. You're going to cross creeks and rivers when you're running. So sometimes having a nice waterproof piece of footwear, if you know you're going to do that, may help. Some people even wear gaiters and things like that up the foot and ankle.
Total side tangent. The Pegasus is one of the shoes that back in the day, I was always asking, like, why do they need a trail version? Like the road version had enough, not anymore. The old versions had solid enough lugs on the outsole. Like, yeah, they were major, like pistons. And so I was like, why do you need a trail version of this? This already has plenty of traction on it, but marketing. And it's very different now. So I'm just judging.
But there's just so many different designs. I mean, here I'm holding up the Craft CTM Ultra 2. Yeah. This is the non-plated version. But this is an all-terrain shoe. I mean, this thing is smooth on the road. The lugs aren't super deep, but they're just deep enough to give you a grip and traction on the foot when you're landing. And I know people that race trail races in these shoes, and they do fine.
And now, David, this is a unique category that I think we've seen a little bit more often. What would you call this?
Like an ultra racer.
Or the way the
shoe.
The other
trail.
Yeah. Other phrase that's been used a lot is a hybrid shoe, a road trail option. Yeah. And those ones you're going to see, again, lugs are going to be there, but not aggressive enough that they're going to get in the way. Because if you, like, I remember trying on the Salomon Speedcross one time and that shoe is meant for like mud. There's very thick, very long lugs on it, and trying to run on road is very uncomfortable, and that's really not what it's meant for. And when you take trail shoes, personal experience, when you take true trail shoes on road, you will burn through those poor lugs. So they're really not meant for road use, except for, maybe short crossings. Whereas your hybrid shoes are going to be able to have lugs that are not aggressive enough to get in the way, but still enough to give you some traction on trail, but it's not going to be the most aggressive thing. So the CTM, I'm holding up the CTM Ultra Carbon 2, and I've really enjoyed that. And again, it's a weird shoe because it's got a super flexible upper. There's not, when we talk about protection of the upper, that's not really there because it's so flexible, but you still got that higher stack height and some lugs. So that's where these hybrids between the two of them, road and trail, kind of come in. But that's a newer category, I feel like. We're starting to see a little bit more like that.
It's blowing up, too. I mean, there's a lot of companies that are starting to create these hybrid models.
Yeah.
I would even throw the more trail in there, the New Balance that we were holding up earlier. I mean, because the lugs on that aren't super deep, but it still has that Vibram Mecha Grip. And, like, it's a trail shoe, but, like, I can run on road on it fine. I think, too, it's important to look at, within the same company, they're going to have different categories within the trail shoes. Both of these shoes that I'm holding up, so the Hoka Torrent 2 and the Hoka Zenal, both trail racing shoes, but they're also very different shoes. And so the Zenal, very shallow lugs, does have a Vibram light-based Mega Grip on there, but it's sticky, but the lugs aren't very deep, no plate. It's kind of meant to just be that light, nimble option that you can go and run fast in. The Torrent is meant to take on some more technical terrain. And if you have a lot of loose rock and things like that, those lugs are a little bit deeper and they can grab a little bit easier and they can shake off that mud as well. So both relatively similar specs. I mean, I think the Zenal is a little bit lighter. I don't know the numbers off the top of my head because it's been a while since I've looked at those, but similar but very different.
So we just talked about some of the hybrid stuff. We mentioned some of the racing models. There are some... What are some other types of trail shoes that people might see out there?
Yeah, you're going to see a lot of high stack rockered trail shoes too. I mean, the Hoka Speedgoat certainly is in that category. You're going to have, I would throw the CTM Ultra and Ultra Carbon 2 in there.
Definitely.
You're going to have your Ultra Lone Peaks. You're going to have, why am I blanking right now? There's so many. The New Balance More Trail V2, Brooks Caldera that I mentioned earlier. A lot of high stack rockered shoes that give you a thick lug design underfoot and then a real supportive upper that really lock you into that platform, because the last thing you want is to be on a relatively high, unstable platform and not have ground feel and have movement on your foot. That's a recipe for disaster if you're on trails. And so a lot of, I think I noticed with these shoes specifically, all those uppers do tend to run a tad bit more like a performance upper. They lock in really well and they make sure you get on that platform. And there's just so much cushioning, right? I mean, like, especially with the trails, I think one thing that's really important to acknowledge is that there's a lot of ultra races. There's a lot of races that are 50 mile, 100K, 100 mile, there's a lot of allure around Western states, and a lot of people are trying to qualify for Western states as like their big goal, right? And chances are you're probably not running in a Hoka Torrent. If you're running a 100-mile race, you're probably going to be wearing a Speedgoat or a Craft Ultra or Lone Peak. I know some people that run in the Lone Peak. Yeah, you're gonna find that tried and true Caldera, like something that just protects your foot for a long amount of time. And so, yeah, that would be another lane of trail shoes.
And that the maximalist trail shoes are kind of where the trail scene is where a lot of those maximalist shoes really started, right? I think at Hoka, some of their original shoes were actually trail shoes,
yeah, man,
and they
those
slowly
were
evolved to the road. Yeah. So, and that max cushioning, again, especially when it comes to protection, that's something that a lot of trail runners seem to gravitate toward. It depends on the person, obviously. But so we've got mentioning some of the hybrid stuff, racing stuff. We've got the max cushion stuff. Any other categories you can think of? For me, one of the things that comes to my mind where it really separates from road is technical trail shoes. And for me, that means something like a great example is like the Cloud Venture or the Cloud Venture Peak from On. They have incredibly deep lugs. Like these kind of shoes are not road shoes. The Salomon Speed Cross series, where the lugs are like, 10 plus millimeters thick, and they're really not meant to be run on road. These are the kind of shoes that make me think of going to the UK and doing what's called fell running, where you're running just along the countryside and there's no trails. You're just like cutting your own path through grass, hills, steep descents. You're working your way through deep mud or snow. I almost said snail. Deep snow. I don't know why I said that. But really, really, really technical trail shoes are going to be matched with really, really technical terrain. Stuff where it's like the worst thing you can imagine. You need the ultimate in grip, ultimate in protection at the same time. But you also, a lot of these shoes tend to be not the most maximally stacked, just because you need to actually be able to have a little bit of, what's the term I'm looking for? A little bit of the ability to move your feet a little quicker to adjust to this quickly changing terrain. So any thoughts on those? I have not tried a lot of those out in the wild. Just I've gotten to run in a lot of them in store or testing them in a couple different areas, but not a ton. Because again, Southern California, we don't have a lot of super technical terrain, at least not where I am.
Yeah, I mean, there's some pretty technical trails out here. I just don't really go into them a whole lot because of the nature of what I'm doing. A lot of it's road racing and track racing, and that's not my lane. I would even throw the Torrent in there. I mean, the lugs, they start off pretty deep. I mean, I've worn them down a decent amount now at this point, but that's the design for it, is for technical terrain. And I don't know. I mean, you definitely get a little bit more of a cleat feeling, right? Like it almost feels like it's almost too much sauce to run on the road, or like a packed dirt road or something like that. Like it feels like you really need to be hitting something hard in those. Mm-hmm. And that's probably the best way that I can describe it. But with that said, when you do enter those realms, that terrain, the type of technicality that's required to use those shoes, the times that I have done it, you are very appreciative of the piece of footwear you have under your foot. You feel very connected to the ground. You feel confident, you feel nimble, and you're able to make those types of decisions much quicker because of the confidence you have underfoot. And I think that's kind of where that line gets drawn, is like, what kind of trail are you running? And if you're afraid of falling because of how technical it is, chances are you probably should put something on that has that's good for a little bit more technicality.
That's one thing. When I used to run trails in road shoes, I thought that falling every trail run was just normal multiple times. And then I started trying some trail shoes, and I'm like, oh, okay, I don't have to slip, or I can move my feet quick enough to adapt to this terrain. So, and maybe, my footwork is terrible, but maybe some people can do that a lot better than me. But especially when getting some of especially at where I used to train up at Mount Baldy, where it's very rocky trails, I was like, oh, it's just normal to eat the ground every single run multiple times. I'm like, oh, this is actually not necessary if you have enough grip and can adapt the terrain with the solid trail shoe. So we mentioned a couple of so kind of the idea behind technical terrain, like, snow, mud, hazardous stuff there that you like, if you're running off the trail, which hopefully you're not in the United States, but other places may do this differently. What are some other terrain that you think might work well? Because we defined this earlier, but I don't think we got it quite well enough. But what are some other terrain do you think really necessitates having a trail shoe?
Yeah, I mean, there's also non-technical trails too, right? So if you're having to go through a lot of single track, high grade, sharp turns, you still need a little bit more traction than an average road shoe. In Southern California, we have a lot of those types of races, you know, whether it's Backbone Trail or anything through like Ray Miller, through Malibu, all of that stuff out there. Nine Trails is pretty technical, but that's in Santa Barbara. But there's a lot of runnable trail out here. And I think even like Black Rock and some of the other popular trails like Sonoma, Marin County, Marin Headlands, you still want a trail shoe most of the time, depending on the runner. There's some people they've been doing it long enough and they feel more comfortable in another shoe, and that's fine. And it doesn't have to be a trail shoe for them. But for a lot of people that want that little bit of extra security, you do have shoes like the Hokas and all and things like that are just much more runnable. Lugs aren't nearly as deep. You can feel the rocks a little bit in this one, but that's also why they've made like the Hoka Tecton X, where it is plated. You do have something underfoot that blocks that impact, but the lugs are still relatively balanced, like deep enough to give you some traction, but they're not so aggressive that you're going to feel uncomfortable outside of technical terrain.
That shoe was one of the ones where like it wasn't meant for this, but I found it surprisingly good for road too. I think like maybe half of my miles in that shoe was on road.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. I mean, a lot of the shoes that are for that non-technical terrain can double a little bit with road or road and trail, and I think that's a lot of the appeal for that category as well. Because there's a lot of people that have access to trail, but they're non-technical trails, but they still want to have a little bit of traction, especially if they're going through like woods or bluff trails or things like that. So yeah, I think that's also a big difference to acknowledge and a reason to put them on. And in a lot of those situations, like you could get away not wearing a trail shoe. I think it just depends on how hard you want to push it and how sharp those turns are or what kind of terrain you're running, because there's plenty of bluff trails here, and there's also some woods that you could run through and not have a trail shoe on and be totally fine. But there's also trails here that like I know I'm going to want my trail shoes on. There's like no way around it. Like I'm putting those things on, not rolling the dice. Right. So I think it all comes down to the comfort level of the individual, but there are a lot of, Chino Hills has it too, right? Through the state park. They got that 50K or whatever. That's another perfect example. A lot of wide kind of fire road type terrain. Every once in a while you hit a single track, but like there's a lot of big grades where you kind of like a lot of rolling type hills and terrain through there. And like, you're probably going to want a trail shoe on some of those downhills. But you might not want something super aggressive.
For Chino Hills is a great example for anybody that lives in Southern California. So, and those that don't, let me describe this. It's a huge state park that we have here in Southern California. It's more kind of out east toward the Inland Empire. So is it technically LA County? I can't remember. Maybe it's right. It's definitely on the border of LA County, Inland, and like Inland Empire. But
that's a good question. They're like right on that border.
Yeah, they're right there. I used to live
there. I live there. I should know this.
Places. Oh yeah, we both lived there. I forgot that. We didn't know each other, and we were running by, like, had no idea, stealing Strava segments from each other until somebody finally mentioned it. But Chino Hills State Park has such a huge variety. So a lot of it is this wide fire road with very smooth trail, right? Very minimal dirt. I ran in road shoes there for years. There are other sections where it starts to get way more technical, where it becomes single track. It becomes a lot steeper depending on where you go. So what you're going to need is going to depend on which of the trails you're going on. It's also going to depend on what's been going on in the environment. That's a great example of a place where, it has smooth trail, but if it rains there, do not take a road shoe there. That is a nightmare because the mud sticks to your feet. That rain just wrecks Chino Hills State Park. So anytime there was rain, even within the last week, I always knew I have to take a trail shoe here or I'm going to eat the ground and fall. And it's not just a single track, because the single track would get pretty messed up. It's also the fire roads there. For whatever reason, the mud, somebody who's a geologist or understands this a lot better than I do. That drainage is
not great.
Yeah, it just would stick there. I got this term called sticky mud. And if you didn't have good enough lugs and good enough trail shoes, that mud would just suck to your foot, and you just every like 100 meters you have to stop, kick off a pound and a half of mud, and keep going. And whereas if you have good trail shoes that can shed mud really well, you were able to do it. But there are only certain types of trail shoes that could handle that. There's certain type of lugs. And I found personally, I think other people maybe feel differently, but a lot of the triangle-based lugs tend to work a lot better there because it felt like they could shed the mud much easier than some of the other designs. So we are not, I can speak for myself. David may have more experience than me. I'm not the most technical trail runner. I love the opportunity to get on them, but I'm not, I'm slowly trying to figure out what lugs work for different terrain. Do you have an opinion on that? Again, hopefully, please comment below on what you think, because there's not a lot of research on this subject. So I have looked this up, and just not a lot of people looked into this. So I'm curious, David, if you think, because lug designs will vary, if you've noticed anything that has better traction or better use on different terrain.
Yeah, I think we alluded to it a little bit earlier, and you kind of just did. If you're in a section that's a little bit more runnable, whether it's wet or dry, having something a little shallower seems nice. Yeah. Kind of that triangular design, because it just kind of sheds right off. It doesn't really stick. With that said, if you are in something more technical, we've got some solid drops here with very rocky and technical terrain, and I've noticed having something like the Torrent or the Peregrine on my foot, where you have deeper lugs, when you're having so much underneath you that's constantly like just moving and shifting around. It's really nice to just have that deeper lug and just sticky outsole to really rely on. Those are probably the two major things that I've noticed when I raced canyons last year. It's pretty runnable. It's got a couple technical sections, but nothing crazy. Just a lot of just elevation changes that really screw with you. But I found that I did really like having the Torrent on those more technical sections when it got real rocky and you were crossing those streams and having that. I think I would have been a little bit more apprehensive if I was wearing something else, not as technical. So I think it also speaks to the experience of the runner to some degree too. Like, how comfortable are you actually running in those terrains? Because if you're really comfortable doing it, you can run in pretty much anything, but it's just a matter of, what you know, your own body, like how nimble are you essentially.
I've seen some people on trail races recently using Vaporflies, and because you're already on a softer surface and you're adding a softer shoe on top of that, like especially something like that, like I don't know how people do that, but if they've got the footwork to be able to handle it, all power to them, but I would never do that. Right. A shoe like the CTM Carbon Ultra 2, yeah, definitely, right? If you want to play, but
I think that's
softer
totally
foams,
fair.
Yeah, that's terrifying. I've seen people do it on like gravel terrain, like ooh.
Yeah, and they do it well. There's some that are, so I guess don't knock it till you try it, but it's like, it's so individualized, but
then when you badly sprain your ankle, come see us afterwards. We're like, oh, we shouldn't have done that.
Right. It's like you were doing what? You're running in a Vaporfly down a 600-foot drop in a single mile down technical terrain. Why were you doing that?
Should have used the Tecton X. Just kidding.
But yeah, kidding. I guess there's one thing I would like to talk about since we just talked about the Vaporfly. It's plates.
Yeah.
So a lot of shoes you'll see in the trail world, they have no plate, they have a rock plate, they have a carbon plate in some of them. I believe the Speed Trail from Skechers had a Pebax plate or nylon plate, one of the two.
Yeah, I think it was a P. I don't remember. That's a good question. It was one of the two, but it was a plate. It wasn't carbon.
Yeah,
might have been. Yeah, they do the infused carbon in their other shoes, but yeah, it's some kind of either Pebax plate, plastic plate.
Yeah. So what do we think about the plates? We for them? We against them? Does it matter?
That's a great question, because for the longest time when we had rock plates, those were more meant for protection. So that in some shoes, right, if they didn't segment it, it would create a little extra stiffness in the forefoot. Whether that actually added to responsiveness, I really didn't feel like it did that. They didn't usually use carbon fiber up there. And now, obviously, since carbon fiber plates are kind of the buzzword in the road scene, you're starting to see these more. So the North Face shoes are some of the early ones that come out with that. You know, you've got the Tecton X now, you've got the CTM Ultra Carbon 2. Yeah, they have plates, and I think the design is a little bit more for adding more rigidity to the sole. And we've talked a lot about, you know, being careful with saying improving performance, because plates, it's kind of variable depending on what you need. But if you like that stiffness and some of that snappiness, that's now something you can find. So the Tecton X is a really great example of that. The CTM Ultra Carbon 2, as I mentioned earlier, you know, it just depends on what you need. I think if you want something that's even stiffer than trail shoes already are, because they usually either have higher stacks, they're inherently more rigid, because a lot of them have a better inherent stability in the road, right? Oh, sorry, David, what were you saying?
No, and also just the outsole firms it up and creates a lot of rigidity too.
Yeah, David's really good at reminding me about how the outsoles can stiffen up the ride. It's something I kind of forget about sometimes. But yeah, it's all the components together. In trail shoes generally lead to much stiffer shoes. There's not many super flexible trail shoes anymore, as we've started moving more toward either traditional or more maximalist type shoes. So whether or not, you know, I'm not against them. I think it's nice to have a little more variety. And it makes people think about running a little quicker, you know, starting to pick up the pace, trying to get a little more of that snappy feel. So not necessarily against it, because it's just something new. I don't know how much it's actually improving people's performance, because that's really hard to measure on trail. Because, you know, when you're on a flat road or a track, it's really easy to measure, you know, the time, whatnot. But when it comes to trail, there's so many factors that can change the race every year that's much harder. So I don't know if it's truly improving performance. It might make you feel faster, right? Just emotionally going, wow, it has a carbon plate, which is a really big buzzword. But I think it's just another option. What do you think?
I agree completely. I think having another option and just more individualization is major for that industry and that category of running, because some people don't like plates, whether it's road or trail. I mean, it was a Camille Herron, like, runs in the Rincon. She doesn't, like, when she races, she doesn't run in the Bondi X or the Carbon X. Right. Yeah, and so some people just don't like having that plate, and I think that's also why you see Craft with the CTM Ultra and the CTM Ultra Carbon, both essentially the same shoe. One's plated, one's not, and the rides they're reflective of that. You know, they feel different. They both feel similar because they're obviously the same platform and geometry, and I think, are the uppers the same? I think they are, right? They don't really feel the same, but
yeah, they feel different. We might need to check that. But the ride is so much different just based on the plate adding so much more stiffness.
No, I think they're the same. Yeah.
That color pattern is way cooler on the CTM.
This pattern makes it seem more synthetic, right? Like, for those that are listening, I'm holding up the CTM Ultra Carbon 2, and like that upper is just so, I don't know, it's fun. It just looks out of this world.
Craft, you got to use this hashtag, arts and craft. I know I said that earlier, and I've said it a million times.
Let's make it a thing.
Yeah, now I'm just getting annoying repeating the same thing just for attention. But
total side note, NBA playoffs have started. Go Warriors! So y'all know where my fandom is. I haven't. Are the Trailblazers? How did they do this year?
I stopped watching, dude. I just gave up a long time ago. I was tired of getting.
I zoned out. I went super hard into NCAA basketball this year, and then like kind of caught back up real quick with NBA.
One more comment, one more trail shoe comment, because we're starting to go up for like zoning out here. The one thing I gotta address, because this has actually been a very commonly emailed question for us, and that is stability in trail shoes. So trail shoes tend to be inherently more stable than road shoes. They tend to have wider platforms. A lot of them have outsole flare. They have plates or rock plates, which add rigidity to them. A lot of the more maximalist designs are having a lot of sidewalls there, both for guidance as well as protection from the elements. The uppers tend to be more secure. But when it comes to actually needing true stability or arch support, that's something you're not going to find as much. I can only think of a couple shoes off the top of my head. The big one recently that we tested was the Topo Mountain Racer. Does have what, you know, they don't officially say it, but there is a medial post there, because I can definitely feel that, and you can see it on there. I'm trying to think of another one. The Asics Trabuco, now 10 says on the side that it has a dual density foam. I'm forgetting what they exactly call it, but the most recent version, the 9 definitely did in previous versions, but the 10 has it on the side, but they're listing it as a neutral shoe. So a lot of people, you know, that's a challenge that you might run into with trail shoes, is they don't have a lot of true stability trail shoes. And they used to. The Adrenaline and the Asics GT2000 used to have trail versions, but those don't exist anymore. The Adrenaline ASR is what that was called, and then I don't remember what Asics called it, the GT2000.
Yeah, they do. They do have a GT2000 trail.
Yeah, do they still have that?
You don't.
Is it still
I think
exist?
they do. You don't see it very often.
Yeah, it's a little more. You kind of have to search for it.
Exist.
Yeah, so those are two stability shoes that are. I mean, the ASR is gone from Brooks, but I haven't seen the updated version, because usually what Asics will do is they'll have their GT2000, and then like 6 months later they'll come out with the trail version of it. I don't think they've gotten that with version 10 yet, but I might be wrong. But for those looking for stability, that's where you're going to run into a challenge, because there's inherent stability that'll provide some mild guidance, but not some of those true measures. So those people that need a little bit more, you may want to rely, again, if you can take the insole out, you might need or an orthotic or something like that. You know, David, do you have any other suggestions? Because we have to we answer this question fairly frequently, usually in email.
I mean, I think you hit it pretty well. A lot of these are inherently stable. You have a lot of built-in rigidity throughout the platform and sidewalls and supportive and reconstructive uppers, you know. You've got a lot of good elements there that almost indirectly make them stability shoes without really saying it. I'm looking at every shoe on the table here, and they've all got something, you know. They've all got sidewalls. They've all got solid uppers. They lock down well. They got great traction underfoot. They've got sole flaring. Yeah, I think you kind of hit it there. I mean, it's hard to find a true, genuine, quote unquote, stability trail shoe. That's just not something that you really see in the market that often.
At least I'd
be curious to see someone go for it. I'd be really curious to see how that played out. I feel like it's just not really a massive buzzword, but the GT2000, there is a trail version. I know it's out there. I just don't know if they've updated. I just can't.
They had it for version 9, but I don't know if they've updated it for version 10 yet. Got to check that after. We'll put that in the notes. A shoe I got a shout out on that is we're going to have a review of the More Trail V2, which might actually be out by the time this episode goes out, but the sidewalls on this thing are so aggressive and come up so high that I usually need some degree of stability, and I do just fine in this shoe. So depending on how aggressive some of those non-traditional stability methods we talk about, sometimes you can get away from it and with it, and this might be one of them. But again, you got to find out what works for you. And David's totally right. You know, I think like 15 years ago, you used to see that more often, but now got to see where people are going, because the maximalist stuff, some of it has a little more inherent guidance, but whether that works for everyone, different story.
Yeah. And I think too, I'm going to throw a bonus subjective out there right now, because we were kind of drawing a blank on this topic. If there are any flexible trail shoes out there, something that's real flexible, non-rigid, very natural feeling underfoot. Not to say these aren't natural feeling, but something that is a little bit more along those lines. Feel free to drop that in the comments. We'd love to see that. The only thing I could think of off the top of my head is like maybe the Skechers Razor Trail, when they took an attempt at that. That was a pretty flexible sole. But even then, it still had some rigidity just because of the full contact outsole. So this in all is like it's pretty rigid, you know, but it's more flexible than some of the other ones. So I'm kind of personally drawing a little bit of a blank on that, and I would love to just see that in the comments. But that also leads us over to our next segment. This is a sponsored episode, so that's awesome. We're so thankful. Today's episode is brought to you by Running Warehouse, and we really appreciate Running Warehouse as they carry such a great variety of brands, and they have such a great return policy with a 90-day return policy, and they keep the runner in mind, let you use things, let you see if it works. And and we're just very thankful for that. There are some great products coming on there very soon, including the Hoka Carbon X3, which is a big release, the On Cloud Runner, the Asics Cumulus 24, as well as the Asics GT 1000 version 11. And we will have reviews up for most of these. And we do have a full review up for the Carbon X3 and Asics Cumulus 24 up at doctorsofrunning.com if you're interested in our thoughts on those models. Spring's also coming around the corner here. So Running Warehouse just updated their inventory with a pretty large inventory of shorts to get you ready for the warmer temperatures. And they also will be having some special pricing on Brooks bras in the first week of May. So thank you, Running Warehouse. And if you are interested in going to Running Warehouse and taking a look at what they have to offer and they have out there, you can check them out at www.runningwarehouse.com. And we will have some links below that can help with that as well. So on to our final segment here. We do have a shoe review. We decided to make it a surprise, and we just barely decided it right before recording this video. So today it's going to be the Hoka Speedgoat 5. So we're talking trail shoes. We're talking high stack rockers. We're talking plates, no plates, you know. The Speedgoat 5 obviously has a pretty large cult following. And I just want to talk about it. Let's see where this goes. What are some reasons for why this shoe may be one of the more popular options out there?
It's funny you say that because I didn't understand before getting this shoe what the hype was about the Speedgoat, because I tried them on in store but never really taken them out, and it wasn't until getting a pair of these that I was like, okay, I need to go try a pair of 4s, and a friend of mine let me borrow his and was running around. So here's the thing about the Speedgoat. It's got speed in the name. So it's a maximally cushioned trail shoe, but it's still one that can move fairly well over long distances. And I tried this multiple times on both normal and technical terrain up at Wrightwood, California, which is a skiing town up north in the San Gabriel Mountains, and snow, all kinds of stuff. So it rides really well. Really, really well. And it's got enough foam underfoot that it's super protective, so I can go ultra long distances in it, which is a lot of times what it's used for. But I was surprised that I could actually still pick up the pace a little bit. This is obviously not a 5K shoe, not a half marathon shoe, but you can still move a little bit. It's like a goat, right? That they're a little weird looking, but when push comes to shove, they can actually move at a pretty good speed, right? Total side note, by the way, I was visiting Portland and still happy to. I don't know if they do this in Southern California, but for landscaping stuff to be more natural, there are companies that will have like groups of goats that they'll put on people's areas. Yeah. And like lawns or whatever.
They do
or
that
they're
in
trying
California
to restructure.
too.
Oh, I didn't realize that. Yeah. And so I love seeing them where they're just like, they fence it off and then the goats will just eat everything. And it's like a day goes by and then everything, like all vegetation and everything else is gone. And so I think that's really cool that I'm seeing this more often.
There's probably some old pictures of me in undergrad doing that. If anyone wants to go stalk that page and go down that rabbit hole. It used to be fun to go say hi to all the goats because they're goats and they also like attention. So they'll mind their own business and they'll come check and see, why are you here?
Can I eat this new thing? Oh no. Okay. I'm going to go back to eating this other thing.
Yeah. So goats are fun, but it's just so funny. You said it's like, you said they look a little weird, and I feel like the Speedgoat kind of used to. I feel like Hoka's done a much better job over the last few years of making these look much more streamlined and approachable shoes.
And they did that with this one, for sure.
Yeah, like this one looks pretty good. I think aesthetically it's solid. Yeah, so that's why I was laughing when you said that. But you're right, it feels nimble. It has that word goat in the name, and you kind of feel like a little bit of a mountain goat when you're running in it. Despite the weight, despite that, I don't have the specs up in front of me. I think, do you have those on hand by chance?
Yeah, I do. So we got to give a little caveat that the specs that we have in terms of the stack height, I don't think they're including the insole, so we got to check on that. But the ones that we were given was for stack height was 33 millimeters in the heel, 29 millimeters in the forefoot for men, and then women it's 31 millimeters in the heel, 27 millimeters in the forefoot. So a 4 millimeter drop regardless of gender, and then weight was 10.3 ounces for men's size 9 and 8.5 ounces for women's size 8. So when it comes to trail shoes, that's on the lighter side, right?
Yeah, especially it's actually for the amount of stack and what you can use it for. 10 ounces is not bad. I'm actually doing a little bit of a side note here. I'm doing a quick little Google search while we're on the podcast live because I'm curious, how much does the New Balance More Trail V2 weigh? Because when I was running in that shoe, I felt like that was a Speedgoat competitor.
I think it's heavier. I think because I just put the specs in for that. I think it's 11.6 ounces for men's size 9.
That sounds about right. But let's see, product details. We're doing this live. Wow, you are on the money. 11.6 ounces.
I just put the specs in, so that's not special.
Yeah.
For our review.
Yeah, we never take any breaks. We should probably work on that. We're constantly just writing reviews and doing videos, but anyways, I feel like those two shoes are pretty comparable. They're both high stack, rockered shoes, non-plated trail options. But for the stack and the protection and the responsiveness and ride, the Speedgoat, it's pretty hard to beat. I think Ultra obviously has the Lone Peak, which a lot of people do really well with as well. I would love to get my hands on a pair of those. I have yet to run in one of those. I know our team got to review it, but every once in a while, like just the way allocations go, sometimes you get it, sometimes you don't. But yeah, I think you kind of hit it where you feel a little bit nimble in this shoe. It rides lighter than what it weighs.
Oh yeah.
And one thing that I really like too is that these lugs, they're just aggressive enough to tackle some technical terrain, but they're not so deep that you feel uncomfortable when you're running on other terrain as well. So for me, most of my runs are road to trail, and I've been able to run in pretty much any variety of trail that I've wanted to in these without sacrificing the ride on the road, which is huge. And I think they also did a great job too with the bevel, and they did a great job with the sidewall integration along the medial aspect and lateral aspect. Yep. You really do get that sense of guidance as you're going through. We talked about all this earlier, but you definitely feel relatively stable in this shoe, and it's exciting to have a shoe that chunky, weigh that light, and be able to do that many miles.
I definitely found it really stable. Again, I'm the one who generally needs stability of the group. And I took that shoe for like a 2.5-3 hour run. My ankles, hips, they was fine. I found that the sidewalls were not, and Hoka often, not always, but frequently does that well. But just the rocker and the sidewalls did really, really well for me. And I ran on everything that day. Snow, dirt, steep inclines, some road. I came away fine. So again, this shoe for me would be, hey, if I don't know what I'm going to have come my way, I'm going to be grabbing the Speedgoat. If I knew, I'm like, okay, my wife just signed me up for an ultra marathon because that's what she'll do. She'll just sign me up for races and I won't know. If I was doing a trail ultra, that would be the shoe on my feet because it can still move a little quick for a trail shoe, but it's got the protection to go, whatever's coming at me, I'm going to be ready for it. Yeah, I know. So David's holding up the CTM Ultra Carbon 2.
I know how much you love this shoe.
Yeah.
I had
love
to throw
that
a wrench
shoe,
in this conversation.
I know, but I think because it's done well for me. But I think when it comes to technical terrain, I'd get a little more nervous on that because the lugs just aren't as thick, and the upper, it's super comfortable, but the upper is just not as secure. But if I was doing something shorter, then definitely it would be Ultra Carbon 2, just because it's been a great shoe that I've really enjoyed, and I want to look good. So got to get that colorway.
Have you run in the Brooks Caldera?
Hashtag. I have not. I don't think so.
That's another personal favorite of mine as far as the high stack, non-plated rocker trail shoes go. I feel like they're both pretty comparable, and that would be a tough call. I mean, I think the upper on the new Speedgoat works a little bit nicer for me. I probably would go Speedgoat on the new round of shoes, but on the old round of shoes, I think I might have gone Caldera. Right. But I didn't get the newest Caldera, so.
Right. So what would you use the Speedgoat for? I'm curious.
Ultras.
Yeah.
Or if I know there's going to be just a crap ton of vert. I think if when I did canyons, I was destroyed running in the torrents. I was happy I did it, but I would have liked a little bit more protection underfoot. One of my friends is she's a very accomplished trail runner and was in that race, and she ran in the Challenger, which I thought was a pretty surprising choice at the time, but it made sense with that much downhill and you're constantly going down, up, like her legs are just much fresher, in the second half of the race there. So I think just having something with a little bit more stack, whether it be the Speedgoat or the Challenger or something along those means, I think if there's a lot of vert, or if I'm just going for days. I mean, if we're talking like, Javelina 100 or Western States or anything like that, I think I'm going to want a little bit more cushion underfoot.
I definitely get why this is such a huge fan favorite and why there's such a large following behind this shoe. And I think version 5, now that I've been able to try version 4, is a big step upward in terms of the fit, in terms of for me, the guidance, and then just how it feels on foot in terms of shoe I can trust. For the Speedgoat 4, and we're going to get a lot of hate for this because I know a lot of people love that shoe. I was like, yeah, it's good. Like, I kind of get it. But the Speedgoat 5 was for me, a eye-opener to go, okay, now I understand. I trust this shoe, and this is a shoe that I would grab if I was doing a 100-mile, even though I would cry the whole time because I would not want to do that. I don't remember. That's a good question. I can't remember
because a lot of people were drawing comparisons to the Evo Speedgoat.
Yeah, that was another big question that we've had. And I haven't tried the Evo Speedgoat for a long time because I know that was a big fan favorite. And we did have that question. People were asking, hey, how does it compare? And from a spec standpoint, the Speedgoat 5 is much closer to the Evo Speedgoat than the Speedgoat 4 was. So it seemed to kind of take the best of both worlds and integrate that in terms of that little more, not snug, but performance style upper, things being a little bit more responsive, being able to pick things up a little bit more. So people that did like the Evo Speedgoat, I'd really encourage you. The Speedgoat 5 is definitely worth a look.
I agree completely. Any other thoughts on the Speedgoat 5? I feel like we've touched a good amount. We've touched the upper, we've touched the midsole and ride. I feel like it's weird. The ride is in some ways boring and in some ways fun. It's another high stack rockered shoe. Like if you're running on flat ground, it kind of feels like a lot of the other shoes that are out there. But I think that's that responsive toe off and the way that traction and outsole is integrated. You get that nimble-esque like feeling when you start going into those technical terrains. And I think that's one of the things that makes this shoe special, where it's like, it's not all or nothing. Like you can run flat, you can run technical, you can do grades, you can do pretty much anything you want. So there's a lot of versatility to it. But yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of it. I think I'd be curious to see myself what shoe I chose on race day. I think a large part of it's dependent on the course and what the distance is. But for not having a plate, I didn't notice rocks or anything like that either. I was able to kind of stomp them into the ground pretty easily. What's up?
To answer your question, they're using, I think it's the compression molded EVA midsole with Speedgoat 5.
Okay.
It's a little more evolved from
sense.
previous stuff that they've used. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not the most exciting, but it's still got enough there that it'll keep you moving.
Yeah.
But I think we beat this shoe into the ground, and not surprisingly, the outsole is still intact after this review. So that's my segue.
Yeah, I'm pretty amazed. These Vibram outsoles are. Yeah, they're holding up pretty well. Vibram and Continental seem to like consistently just withstand the test of time. From Adidas uses Continental, right?
Well, they got to use Continental in the right place, and it's got to be because if several of their shoes I've still ripped through, but that's just
you're
me.
Right. Some of them they're selective on where they put it.
Yes,
and then like you just destroy the pieces that don't have it on there.
Yes,
but that's a conversation for another time.
That's a different conversation. Well, are these shoes Klein proof or not? No, just kidding. Anyway,
can they survive the destroyer? That should be a new segment.
Usually not.
Oh man, if there's any fans out there that want to give us a nice little headline for that one, I don't know. That'd be a funny little segment, kind of like how we're doing the sub 2 and everything like that. Like Klein proof.
That would be interesting.
Like destroyer proof.
Talking about maybe we need to do that. Talking about durability, because I mean, not to go on another segue, right, or it's like off tangent, but that's what's kind of annoying me with a lot of shoes is these shoes are getting more expensive, and it's maybe just me, but the durability has just tanked for a lot of these shoes, and that might just be my mechanics are getting worse. But I'm kind of noticing that on some of these companies too, because there's such a big push for weight reduction and more streamlined outsoles and things like that. And you're seeing a lot of companies they'll straight up do a compressed molded or
just rubberized EVA outsole entirely, you know, or yeah, I think some of the outsole durability things have lessened a little bit as far as having a solid rubber underneath your foot. They're still durable in their own way, but they just, in the traditional sense, seem to be a little less, regardless of whether or not how long they hold up mileage wise, as far as degradation of the material goes. But anyways, I think with that we'll wrap up the podcast here. Any other final thoughts?
Yeah, I think trail shoes, people are getting more interested in trail. There's been some clear evidence that the trail scene is starting to expand. People are starting to notice it more. And I think for that reason, we're starting to see more trail shoes come out and more companies are interested in this. It's still more niche than road. And I think it will be for some time. And I think it's just because people have more access to road, and that's just how it goes. But I'm hoping that as people start thinking about, hey, if we're getting out in the wild, maybe safety is a concern, security is a concern, grip is a concern, it's really a good reason to think about some of these shoes. And you don't have to get, you know, a lot of the other quote unquote hiking shoes are super heavy. There's some great alternatives here with the trail shoes. And I really hope we can see these start to expand a little bit more in terms of, you know, and I'm biased, right? I'd love to see some more stability stuff there, but stability is also a niche. So there's a, you know, you got to think about from a marketing standpoint too, what's going to profit the companies and what's not. So who knows? We might see a larger expansion. We've already got some racing shoes coming out for the first time in forever. So who knows?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be interesting to see whether or not, like, stability integration, like we were just talking about, but also these super critical midsoles.
Yep.
You know, they're starting to plug it into everything. And, like, I'd be curious to see, like, I don't know, like, let's say Adidas Terex and they have a top sole of the Light Strike Pro and then a bottom half. Yeah, what's that?
On Instagram, I have seen a trail audio.
There is one out there, isn't there?
There is.
Yeah, I saw that too. I forgot about that until now.
Yeah.
And then the person was like, I can assure you this is going to be awesome. Like,
I would, that is the one. There's a couple, those who have listened to us for a while and follow us know there is a specific super shoe that I've taken on trail, although I wouldn't suggest it. The Adios Pro 2 is definitely not one that I would ever do that in. So we'll have to see what happens. Maybe, maybe I'll have to eat my words. Maybe we'll try this shoe and be like, oh, this is great, he said before he fractured his ankle. But who knows? So yeah, on that, I'm curious to see if some of the stuff going on in terms of marketing and like the super shoe-esque, like these newer foams, like we're already starting to see the plates go that direction, but wonder what's going to happen with these foams and whether they start updating that as well. There's always been some talk about it. We've seen prototypes, companies are talking, but we'll have to see what they end up debuting and putting out there.
Doing.
Yeah.
Who knows? We might have a Nike Vaporfly trail.
I think that also exists. I think that also exists.
Vaporfly trail?
Yeah, not on the market, but this is what happens when you hunt Instagram. Like
someone's playing around with,
yeah, I know somebody
a trail outsole and then like a Gore-Tex upper or something.
Yeah, it was one of the sole swapping websites, or somebody swapped, I think, a Vibram outsole onto a Vaporfly, which still terrifying.
Well, you could get it if you do the customized one. They do have the more waffly, tready kind of option.
Oh, I forgot about that. I still wouldn't take that.
Yeah, you can do that, and it's no extra charge. Like if you go and you make it. Anywho,
yeah, we're gonna keep going on tangents until we both fall asleep.
Yeah, we got to cut ourselves off, and I got a Warriors game to catch. So
right. I have another paper I have to write.
That's the episode. Yeah, it never ends.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for tuning in to the Doctors of Running Virtual Roundtable. We're thankful for the viewership and all the support that everyone's given us to this point, and we're just excited to keep continuing and growing. We're on pretty much every platform out there, whether it be if you're on audio, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Audacity, anything out there. We're pretty much on it at this point. This will obviously go on YouTube as well. We're on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn.
Twitter.
Do we have Twitter? Do we have a TikTok? We have a TikTok, right? I think I personally don't have a TikTok, so I can't.
I don't either, but it's one of the many geniuses of Bach that has us with the TikTok. So, but yeah, also have Strava group out there, all kinds of whatever. Do we still have the Pinterest going?
We might. I think. Bach. I mean, I don't think we ever shut it down. I don't know
Yeah.
if it's active,
So
but we have it.
Pretty
I think.
much
Yeah.
every social media site, you can find us on there if you want to follow us, see what we're doing, share our stuff, and then stay tuned. Right? If any questions, obviously we always try to get to our emails. We're always delayed on that stuff. We appreciate people that reach out. And as always, if you could either like, subscribe, and especially on the podcast channel, if you could leave a review, that would really, really help us. So we really, really appreciate that because, again, it helps with searchability, and we just want to be able to get this information out there.